Does evolutionary theory predict that the woke will win the culture war because they're willing to resort to ruthlessness and riling up the masses to a degree that the opposition would not?
Depends what you mean by a win. I do think there is a way in which a coalition is liable to re-evolve that actually meritocracy, and I'm not suggesting that we have a meritocracy, but we have a meritocratic thread in our economic system and our political system, and it creates people who are not on the winning side who will inevitably form a coalition. But the coalition is unstable. And so the point is, as they win, they will tear themselves apart. And we have seen this. The left eats its own. And we have been them, in fact. And so the prediction is, yes, they will beat expectations, but in the end, their fate is sealed. And the problem is, it leaves the door open for the rent-seeking elites to fill the power vacuum that will...
And how?
Yes, as if the rent-seeking elites had any trouble getting power.
Yeah, but they're moving right in. They're just they're gonna create a new thing, having created a old thing that turned out to be fragile and full of gaping holes, both truly and logistically and intellectually. And it worked so badly the first time. Let's go for a second round.
But you can actually, I was thinking about saying something in the main discussion about this, but you can see their ploy in these symbolic nominations. And I'm not arguing, in the case of the current nominee for the Supreme Court, she's obviously qualified. Mm-hmm. But the pretense was made that she was the most qualified person when, before her nomination was announced, in fact, during the campaign, Biden said he would nominate in
fact, that's one of the questions here, which is more of a comment.
So we might as well address it.
Considering that Biden explicitly stated that he was going to nominate a black woman to the court, being a woman is one of the characteristics that qualified her for the nomination. Being unable to define the term should have disqualified her then and there.
It's a fair point.
And I was thinking about this specifically. I think she's clearly qualified. She has the qualifications. There's just no questioning that. But there are a lot of people who are clearly qualified. And the fact is that Biden was like, oh, wow, how will I choose? Well, I'm going to start with two immutable characteristics and thus limit the place. And frankly, Ketanji Brown Jackson appears to be so qualified that if I were her, I would be upset that I was there following him saying that he was going to nominate a black woman, because clearly some number of people will always think that she is there because she's a black woman, and she might well have won on her merits.
Well,
in fact, is going to win presumably on her merits, having been given a handicap to begin with.
Let's do this carefully.
Okay.
She is obviously qualified. Biden announced that he had found the most qualified candidate.
I didn't know that he had said that.
He did.
Yeah, okay.
And actually it set off Jordan Peterson, who said something on Twitter that got him in some hot water. What he said was exactly right, which is that having announced in advance these characteristics, the likelihood that she is the most qualified candidate is low.
Might be.
Right. Exactly. But the basic point is, look, you eliminated anybody who wasn't female and wasn't black. And so assuming that qualification is equally distributed across populations, which frankly is unlikely, not because of inherent differences between people, but because histories of oppression mean that differential access to the things that make you qualified is a real phenomenon, even still. So having set out those characteristics, Biden presumably doesn't even know if he found the most qualified candidate. And we know that there is a history, we don't know, but we can surmise that there's a history in this administration of prioritizing symbolism over qualification, right? So we have...
What could you possibly be talking about?
I could be talking about Rachel Levine, who might be the most qualified person for the Assistant Secretary of Health position that she got.
I don't think so.
Let's just say it was pretty clear that the nomination was about something else. It was about prioritizing symbolism over something else. We can say the same thing about the appointment of Sam Brinton to be the head of nuclear waste disposal at the Department of Energy, which I must tell you is going to sound to lots of people like that's a mundane job. It is anything but.
Yeah,
right?
we talked about this at some length a couple of episodes ago. Right?
I know, but I think people do not fully appreciate how much is at stake in the way we deal with nuclear waste. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, you need a candidate for that job who understands the importance to the future of humanity of getting all nuclear waste that is cool enough to move out of the cooling pools and into dry cask storage, to get it out of the state where it requires constant vigilance to keep it cool enough not to catch fire.
Right. Right.
And so, in any case, the fact that in the middle of a pandemic, Biden made a symbolic appointment to the Assistant Secretary of Health position, and with
who then went on to win someone's Woman of the Year, which is just...
It was USA Today, and she at the same time won the Babylon Bee's Man of the Year, which is what got Tucker Carlson suspended from Twitter for...
Did he retweet the Babylon Bee or something?
Well, he retweeted Charlie Kirk, who basically described Rachel Levine's having lived as a man, produced a family, etc., before transitioning.
The father of several children, right? Or
right.
Two.
And
father
and
contributed sperm to those children.
Right. So,
father of those children.
So Charlie Kirk made that point.
What?
Yeah, you want to put up
father of children, Woman of the Year. Okay. He says, I guess almost no one just listens to this, but
he says,
but wait, both these tweets are true.
And he's referencing Charlie Kirk's tweet here.
Richard Levine spent 54 years of his life as a man. He had a wife and a family. He transitioned to being a woman in 2011. Joe Biden appointed Levine to be a 4-star admiral. And now USA Today has named Rachel Levine as a Woman of the Year. Where are the feminists? Yeah, it's actually one of the things we have not talked about is I'm not shocked, but it is noteworthy that most of the people who are benefiting from the trans activism, I'm not talking about the legit trans people who are trying to live their damned lives with some dignity and privacy, of which there are many, some of whom we know. But this is mostly men declaring themselves women and walking into women's spaces and taking some of the hard-won rights of women, and that would look like a patriarchal move if ever there was one. But who mostly is defending these people? It's women. It's mostly middle-class women who are defending these people and saying that if you don't, you're an ist, you're a whatever kind of ist, who frickin' knows? But it's both not surprising and so disheartening. There are a lot of feminists, mostly people who call themselves radfems, radical feminists, who are saying no way, no how. And, I feel that what I understand of the history of radfems, of radical feminists, is that it is too agnostic on the biology, that it understands sex, but that it doesn't understand the downstream stuff of gender being tied together and being evolutionary and being not nearly as much your fate as your sex, but that it's still relevant to your sex. And you can be gender nonconforming all you want, but that doesn't mean that there's not an evolutionary component. But the radfems are completely right on the trans activism stuff. And yet so many other women who would have been 5 or 10 years ago talking about the glass ceiling and really hoping for more female representation on the court, for instance, or, first female president, are cheering this on. And it's bad for everyone, but it's obviously bad for women.
Yeah.
I mean, Rachel Levine gets Woman of the Year?
Right.
What the actual hell?
It's obviously bad for women. And the other thing is that the willingness to make symbolic appointments to positions that actually matter, right? Like, we've got a pandemic. with a dangerous virus.
Yeah.
Okay. To appoint a symbolic person to the job of Assistant Secretary for Health at such a moment is to effectively say, look, it doesn't really matter who's in the position as long as they're above some threshold of qualification. Same thing you could say for Sam Brinton and the nuclear waste question. Now, in the case of
Ketanji Brown Jackson,
we are dealing with somebody who's very qualified. But again, right, what rests on the Supreme Court's ability?
Different, right? It's different in that she appears to actually have the qualifications.
I'm not even sure that that's what makes it different, because the problem is there too. So we've got Assistant Secretary of Health, the person in charge of nuclear waste disposal, and a candidate for a Supreme Court seat in the middle of an era where the most important issues are being adjudicated, right? Like free speech is in jeopardy as a result of novel environments. So the point is, they're really saying qualified enough, above a certain threshold, it doesn't matter. In all of these cases, it matters dramatically, right? From the point of view of having a court that can protect the rights of a population, including women of color, right? You need as qualified a person as you can get, and even that may not be sufficient. And so the idea that you would limit the categories to do something symbolic rather than figure out, all right, this is an era in which a great deal is at stake. We need to find the best person, and what actually makes it different is that
we need the best person for the job, and that means, in part, understanding the different ways that problems show up and figuring out how to actually think through lots of steps,
right? And
not just being able to say, well, I've got this wealth of knowledge because of my education, and therefore if you tell me what I need to do right here in a very limited way, then I can do it, and then I can do this. That's not a smart or wise person, although they may well have gotten all the accolades and the grades at school.
And there is another danger here, which is that when at the very top we are modeling the behavior of using demographic considerations to figure out who's qualified, that may actually be mirrored all the way down the line, right? And so the question of, all right, Sam Brinton took the relevant courses.
Right.
Did he do actually well, or did the same characteristics that caused him to be appointed to his position cause him to get a pass in those classes? And I'm not saying he didn't do well in them. I'm saying we don't know, because there's now this instinct to take people with certain demographic characteristics and declare them qualified whether they are or not.
Right. And we know of cases, individual cases of this having happened, for instance, at Evergreen, when we're still there, right? deans coming to faculty and saying, why did you write such and such a narrative evaluation of this student? Well, because that's how they did, and this class was like, this never happened to us. So in classes that really were very quantitative in nature, and you can argue that test questions are unfair, this, that, or other, right? But it's one thing in an English class, right? It can be very hard to figure out what the assessment's supposed to look like, and you can have a real sense of like, that's not the grade he should have gotten, and sometimes you're going to be right, and I've certainly seen cases like that. But in a class in which there are tests that everyone is taking, and there isn't a hue and cry about like, that test was ridiculous, the answers were wrong, or it had nothing to do with what we learned, or you taught us the opposite, or whatever, right? Like in a class where the vast majority of people were like, yeah, that was fair, and yeah, I didn't do as well as I could have, but that's on me. When you have administration coming to faculty saying that person needs to get a better assessment, well, but they didn't do better.
Right.
Well, but that person, you've seen the color of their skin, haven't you?
Right.
They need to be given a better assessment. That is anti-meritocratic, anti-intellectual, anti-democratic, anti-everything we should be caring about. We know that's happening at least at one little podunk experimental college in the Pacific Northwest, and we have heard stories of it happening lots of other places as well. So, that is the end of education, and of being able to tell anything about what a person can do based on transcripts, and of course we know this to be the case.
Yeah, there's that. And it's, of course, doing no favor to people who are benefiting, especially if you can get all the way through the system on the basis that you deserve to pass rather than you earned it.
Right.
And, so it's not that it's a simple problem to solve, but it's a problem you have to solve. And at the point that we're putting important things like how nuclear waste is going to be disposed of, or how we're to deal with the pandemic, or how we're going to navigate the question of freedom of speech in 2022, these are vital roles. And, again, the most qualified person might not be good enough for the job.
Right.
Taking anything less is insane.